Hey guys, welcome to the show. In today's episode, we have Laurence Annez, and she's a nutritional consultant, PCOS health coach, and she helps women manage their PCOS with her one-on-one consultations and PCOS coaching program. So we're going to talk a lot about the HPA access, adrenal dysfunction, diet, and so much more. So this is going to be a great episode. Stay tuned. Have you ever thought about making your own podcast? I'm sure you have great ideas, but you just don't know where to begin. Well, here's where Anchor is going to be a lifesaver. It's a one-stop shop for creating and distributing any podcast. Best of all, it's 100% free. They have creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor then quickly distributes your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and so much more, just with one click. You can make money from your podcast right away with no minimum listenership. That means easy access to sponsors. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So why don't you check out Anchor today? Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Welcome to the Khatibi podcast, your source for all things health, happiness, and beauty. Thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Can you give us a background on your personal health journey to now working as a health and PCOS coach?
Of course. So I think a lot of us get into health coaching or, this kind of world from our own struggles. And that's definitely what happened with me. So I was kind of in denial for a long time in terms of my PCOS. I heard it coming up a lot, like maybe it's PCOS, saw it on the internet, got scared. And basically, there was a traumatic experience in my life that really was the trigger to a cascade of symptoms for me. So I was dealing with, digestive issues, bloating, candida, food allergies, leaky gut, anxiety, depression, everything from hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's, emotional eating, disordered eating, binge eating, acne, really bad cystic acne. I lost my period. I even saw, some hair loss starting and hirsutism. So basically not a fun time. And a lot of it just hit me all at once, like it usually does. And this really was the catalyst to figuring out what was going on, because I was not getting answers in conventional medicine, wasn't getting answers when I went to the dermatologist, etc. And it became really frustrating. So I came across a book on nutrition, and that really opened my eyes to this whole other world and to a lot of things that I thought I was doing right, but I really wasn't. So that led me onto my journey for, being my own guinea pig at first for a few years. Then I was, researching, going down all of these rabbit holes. And eventually I found holistic nutrition, enrolled into certification program, also went into health coaching program. And since then, I decided to dive really deep into PCOS. I was told you got to have a niche, you got to focus on one thing. So it was pretty obvious to me, let's focus on PCOS. So I used all of my knowledge from, my certification, but then also a lot of research on my own and experimenting with myself and obviously coaching other clients to really start to understand this syndrome. And that's pretty much what led me here today. So it has been, a tough few years, but as soon as I started to understand, what are the root imbalances and how you really need to approach PCOS, that's where the shift started to happen. It wasn't just when I was looking for, the quick fix or like the pill that I could take or the topical, that none of that stuff never worked.
Can you tell us what type of PCOS you had? Like, for example, mine is androgen, high androgens, high adrenals, and estrogen dominance.
Yeah. So for me, I think it can also fluctuate, but for me, it's definitely adrenal stress PCOS. I definitely see my symptoms flare up when I'm under, a lot of stress, and I'm very, very sensitive. Obviously, PCOS women, we've actually been shown to be more sensitive to stress and cortisol, but I do have lean PCOS. I have more of the adrenal stress type. I am also more estrogen dominant as well. And there is always going to be the chronic low grade inflammation going on. So that's kind of my type of PCOS and what's going on for me specifically.
So I like to address this in most of my episodes that I do with health coaches. Why are health coaches so important to make up for a serious lack in our healthcare system?
So I think the main issue is with clients, especially when I see them come to me, they're so surprised by how in depth I go and all of the questions I ask, all of the information I want to know. And it's really not just about what you're eating as well. It's a holistic viewpoint because they're really not used to having the time with a practitioner. So to be able to go through all of these things, it's an accumulation of events and habits that have been going on in your life. So they do accumulate. So it's really important to know what you have been doing. And doctors just don't have the time to do this. So this is what health coaches really do. We take the time to listen to our clients and understand where they're coming from, what they've been doing, what hasn't been working, etc. And we're there along the journey to keep you accountable, because I think that's also an important part that's missing. You might be able to get like a protocol or be told to do something, but if you're not really given the tools to initiate that and accomplish it, it's going to be really hard to stick to it. Like we see all of these things like go on a diet, go on an exercise plan, whatever. But a lot of the time we see people falling off the wagon, quote unquote. This is definitely the season for that. And we are just not given the tools. And we need to go a lot deeper than just telling people what to eat, because that's not the whole picture. And there is a lot of mindset stuff that goes into this. So that's where health coaches do differ. We really dig into, the past experiences of our clients, and then we're there to actually hold them accountable and help them throughout the journey, because it's always going to be, another obstacle that comes up, and there's going to be challenges, and, things are going to go well, and then they're not, and then it's going to go well. So life is a journey, and we're really there to kind of hold their hand through that.
Let's talk about toxin and PCOS. I just found out that my local water system has really high levels of flame retardants. So that's super fun. So
wow.
Yeah, this is like such a huge problem for everyone, and especially detrimental for women with PCOS. So what role do environmental toxins play in the pathophysiology of PCOS? Did I say that wrong?
Oh my goodness. I'm not even sure. I think there's different ways to say it. So okay. I got it. So yeah, I mean, toxins, it's just been shown to have such a profound effect on not only PCOS, but also this epidemic of chronic disease that we see. And really, we do have research on it, but it's kind of a guinea pig experiment, to be honest, because we're not really sure what this means for long-term health, especially since there's a lot of toxins that have been in our environment for many years, accumulating. Even if they're banned now, they're still in the environment. And there's so many chemicals now. We have nearly 800 chemicals that are known or suspected to play a negative role in hormonal disruption. And the list is growing, and we really just don't really know what this means for, generations to come. So it is quite scary. When it comes to PCOS, there's definitely a genetic factor in play for PCOS, but a lot of research has, leaned towards more of an epigenetic phenomenon that is looking at lifestyle factors and environmental exposure specifically. And this is going to be in terms of high androgens and endocrine disrupting chemicals. So there have been studies that are showing and linking PCOS development being linked to high androgen exposure from the mother and being exposed to these toxins while you're in the womb, basically. So it is an important factor in the development of PCOS, and more studies are coming out and talking about this. Specifically, BPA is one of the most, researched chemicals, especially when it comes to PCOS. And scientists are confirming and showing studies that women are much more likely to develop PCOS if there was BPA exposure as a fetus. And BPA especially has been shown to be higher in PCOS women and actually worsen the hyperandrogenism state. I can never say that word, but it's basically BPA can increase androgen. So that is, a factor with PCOS, obviously very characteristic. We have higher male sex hormones, and BPA can actually make that worse. They can also interfere with insulin functioning. So insulin resistance is a big problem with PCOS, affects about 75-80% of PCOS women. And this can also worsen the PCOS phenotype. So as you know, there are different phenotypes. So we can have more severe phenotypes, more severe symptoms, and BPA exposure can actually worsen that. So there are studies linking endocrine disrupting chemicals and the exposure of these to PCOS development and worsening your type. More studies will be needed. We don't really know the extent, as I mentioned, of what these toxins can do, but they have actually been shown to affect us transgenerationally as well, meaning if you are pregnant and you have, your daughter in your belly growing, it can also affect her eggs. So it can affect, different generations. So that is quite scary. It's not something that I want to, freak people out about, because a lot of the time we can't really control. We'll talk about, toxins later, what we can do about it. But it's just something to be aware of and to do what we can. And we really do need to be aware that these toxins do play a very big role in PCOS development, but also how it's showing up for you.
Where might the average person be getting these toxin exposures other than like BPA and plastics? And what steps can we all take to limit exposure?
Yeah, so again, we want to do what we can control. It's not about, looking at all these toxins in our environment, like, oh my God, how do I avoid them all? Like, we really want to focus what's in your environment. Some common ones, as you mentioned, the plastics. Most people are aware of that. It's just important to be mindful that a lot of people are looking for like the BPA free plastics and things like that. But I usually recommend getting away from all plastics, just because BPA is not the only chemical. There's BPS, other chemicals too. And there might not be as much research on them, but they are still going to be endocrine disrupting chemicals. So just ditching the plastic altogether. Receipts are actually big factors, big sources of BPA as well. And we don't really think about that. So I usually recommend people ditch the receipt, ask to be emailed the receipt instead. Your water supply is going to be obviously a really important factor to consider as well. As you mentioned, it also depends where you are, but there are going to be toxins in our water supply across the board. So I always recommend going for a water filter, avoiding drinking tap water as much as you can. Cosmetics, a big one. So what you're putting on your body. I usually recommend looking at the Environmental Working Group, so ewg.org. It's a great resource to check what your products are looking like in terms of the ratings of how much toxins are in them. Because a lot of things are going to show up, like the parabens and all of these other chemicals that a lot of countries, for instance, in the European Union actually have banned a lot of these chemicals, but in North America, it's not the case. So there are a lot of these chemicals that are going to be endocrine disruptors, but we're just not even paying attention to it, or, the government doesn't really care, to be honest. So the best thing to really do is to look at the Environmental Working Group. So that's a great resource, because then you can kind of rate that. I usually recommend staying away from all of these products with 10,000 ingredients on them, with all of these names that are very complicated and long. You should be able, it's like your food, you should be able to pronounce it and know what it is. And if not, put it back on the shelf. I usually recommend people making it yourself. That's the best way, using like essential oils, things like that. But yeah, I usually find people, the biggest sources are going to be water, what you put on your body. So again, that goes into makeup, lotions, shampoos, etc. And then, what you're being exposed to on a regular basis, like receipts. If you're a cashier, we don't want to look at maybe using gloves, things like that. But they are in many products.
So I want to do a little rant quick on Amazon. because I love Amazon. It's super convenient. I mean, I'm waiting for a package from them right now. But I found out, like, I was watching a documentary on like products. I think it's called Broken, one of the episodes of it. And it's showing all these like skincare products, mascaras, foundations, whatever. And you think they're like the actual brand, but they're really counterfeit and you don't know what's going into them. And people are getting eye infections. They're putting like super glue in there instead. They're putting like toxic stuff in there. So it's like we're being exposed to these chemicals, even thinking, because we look on the label, that looks safe. This is a brand I trust, but you're buying it from the wrong source. And then you could be getting exposed to it.
100%. And I see that with supplements as well as, you know, the topicals you're talking about. And yeah, I see a lot of people, like even doctors who have formulations of supplements, and they're seeing this happening to their products. Like people are buying, they think they're buying their products, but they're not. So being really careful, either, you know, contacting the actual source and asking them about it, or yeah, buying from the store, because Amazon can be a little bit sketchy too. So really, you know, making sure that you are buying from a trusted source is going to be really, really important, because that is something that's an issue now.
Yeah, Amazon is the new eBay, because if you even write a review and you put, oh, the product was counterfeit, they won't publish it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
something to think about, because like I found out my hair color was counterfeit, my mascara, my this, my that, and I'm like,
Wow.
darn, I'm trying to do like the good thing and get like the more natural products, but if you buy it from the wrong place.
Yeah, and that's the thing. People think that they're doing something good for their bodies. Like I see that a lot with supplements too, or, you know, hair products, beauty products, whatever. It says natural, it says organic on it. Oh, it must be good. But then they're putting all these chemicals in there, supplements as well. You know, you might not even be getting a therapeutic dose. You might not be getting the active form of whatever you're buying. You might be getting tons of fillers and additives. So we really need to be educated. And that's where it can be really helpful to work with someone, because we've done the research and we actually, you know trusted brands and all of that kinds of things.
Yes. So since we've all been exposed to these toxins, what can we do to support our body to detox and hopefully eliminate these toxins?
Yeah, so now January is definitely the detox month. So everyone's going into the cleanses and the detoxes. So I actually did a webinar on this about a week or so ago. And a lot of people, are going into like the juice cleanses or the fasting or whatever, and it's kind of like a once or twice a year thing. But we have to remember that our bodies are constantly being exposed to toxins internally and externally that they have to process, and our liver never has a break. Like there is no holiday for the liver. So we have to remember that it's a daily, work that they have to go through. So the first step is really, as we mentioned before, trying to avoid exposure, because even if you're supporting your detoxification organs, but you're getting so much coming in, you're not really going to be, reaching your health goals. Like you're going to hit a plateau, and this can also obviously create a lot of havoc in the body. So first of all, we really want to minimize our exposure of what's coming in. So as we mentioned before, looking through your products first, that's really the first place to start. And then making sure that your elimination organs are actually working properly, because if you're not going to the bathroom at least every day, then there's going to be a lot of backlog, and toxins are not going to be able to get out of the body, and that's where it can become very toxic and dangerous. So looking at your poop is really important. I always tell people you got to look at what it looks like, because you might even be going, once a day, but if it's not an optimal looking poop, then we still got a problem. So Bristol stool chart is something I recommend my clients look at, and then, making sure that they're going at least once a day. Because again, if we're having constipation issues, we don't want to go into a liver detox, because what happens is that toxins can actually become more toxic through this detoxification phase, and they can accumulate and become reabsorbed into the bloodstream, and that they can become even more dangerous than before. So we don't want to, start to release toxins from fat cells, etc., if we are not eliminating properly. So that's really the first step, minimizing your exposure, making sure you're going to the bathroom, and then giving the liver some love. So there's lots of things that you can do. Obviously, we've seen all the detox teas and the herbs and the milk thistle. These can be really great to help support the liver. But we also have to remember that detoxification is actually a pretty complex process. There's, phase one, phase two, and then phase three in the colon. So with the gut health and the gut microbes and all that. And phase one and phase two does require substantial nutrients by the liver. And this isn't something that you can just really get from a juice cleanse, because there's a lot of things that you need, like glutathione and B vitamins and amino acids, and a lot of the things you can be missing if you're not getting, a good diet and you're not getting the nutrients you need. So we really need to remember that our nutrient status is going to be really, really important for liver detoxification, because it needs these nutrients to actually go through this detoxification process. So that's where I think a lot of people kind of go wrong with getting into detoxes. They think that they're going to do, again, juice cleanse or whatever, but their body is, not eliminating properly. It doesn't have the nutrients, the building blocks. So that's usually where I start. And then you can go into things like, the milk thistle, the dandelion to support as well. But if you don't have the building blocks and the nutrients needed, then it's not really going to do much.
So food is a big topic in the PCOS community. Some say you have to do keto, some say it's plant-based, and on and on and on. So what do you find to be the most beneficial way of eating for women with PCOS?
Yeah, so I get this question a lot, like, what should I eat with PCOS? And this isn't really a question I can answer, because everyone is different. We have to look at bio-individuality. And that's what I do as a holistic nutritionist. I can't just say, everybody go on keto, everyone go on plant-based diets, whatever, because they're going to affect us differently. Some people, they swear by keto, they swear by whatever diet they're doing. Somebody else might try it and they feel terrible, etc. And we also have to remember that PCOS actually is a syndrome that puts you more at risk for disordered eating. So this is very common in PCOS women. I see this all the time, coming from the dieting world and restrictions and all of these kinds of things, and fearing macronutrients and just having an unhealthy relationship with food. So this is the first thing I caution against, because going into these fad diets and these restrictions really does increase the risk of going into, emotional eating, disordered eating, binge eating, all of these kinds of things. So that can obviously be very dangerous. And then really focusing on, what makes you feel good. So there are certain foods, obviously, across the board I recommend avoiding, like the refined sugars, refined carbohydrates, processed foods, junk food, obviously, the hydrogenated fats, like the vegetable oils that are highly inflammatory. So all of the inflammatory foods that are going to be damaging across the board. I don't really like using the word bad, because then we go into this sort of restriction and this, strict mentality again. But these are definitely not doing anybody any favor. It doesn't matter if you have PCOS or not. And then when it comes to PCOS, I really focus on really prioritizing the non-starchy vegetables, the greens, the cruciferous vegetables, making sure you're getting a healthy protein source, a healthy fat source at every meal. And this obviously depends, again, if you're more omnivore, carnivore, vegan, whatever. But there are ways to play around with your diet. And it's just trying to become more intuitive about how you feel with the food you're eating. That's what I try to teach my clients. It's, looking at nutrient density, obviously, but then also looking at how you feel physically and emotionally when you eat something, because I think that's going to play a very big part. And then also making sure that you are aware of the foods that are triggering you. So, some people are going to be more sensitive to things like soy, corn, gluten, wheat, dairy, all of those things. I usually see gluten and dairy cause more problems with PCOS women. So when they cut it out, they usually feel better due to various mechanisms like inflammation and spiking insulin. But at the end of the day, we really want to focus on whole foods. So something without a package, without ingredients on the label. And then just making sure that you are becoming more in tune with your body and learning how to differentiate, foods that make you feel good and feel bad. That's kind of where I start. And then we can get into the details in terms of each person. But there's really not one size fits all.
When I started changing my diet up for PCOS, I found that the food restrictions could be they kind of led to a lot of stress around eating. So how can women with PCOS kind of avoid the emotional eating that food restrictions can cause and any disordered eating?
Yeah, definitely. And I definitely fell into this trap too. during the worst part of my PCOS, I was restricting so many food groups because I was dealing with leaky gut and all of these food sensitivities. I literally was reacting to everything. So during at least a few months to a few years, I was avoiding so many foods and avoiding social outings and becoming very isolated. And I developed emotional eating, binge eating, orthorexia. And this really was the worst time of my life, really. I lost my period and everything. And I thought that I was being super healthy because I was avoiding all of the foods. But this was, again, going into the restriction and just focusing on what you can't have. And it really took a hit on my mental health and emotional health as well. So there may be periods of time where you have to eliminate certain foods, specifically, if you're reacting to them or whatever. But restrictions do trigger this sort of animal response to binge eat. There have been studies that have shown that if you have a history of chronic dieting, then that can put you at a bigger risk for this type of thing. And it's very difficult to control yourself when you are in that state. Anybody who has binged eat before knows what I'm talking about. When you want that food, it doesn't matter if somebody tells you to go call a friend, go for a walk, do something else. You don't want to do any of that. When you're in that state, you really can't control it. And it's this sort of animalistic urge that's starting in the brain, and that's really difficult to overcome. So restrictions, I definitely recommend to avoid. Obviously, there's a time and a place when you might have to be a little bit more strict with your diet, but this is where I recommend working with someone to make sure that you're not doing this for longer than needed. And then really focusing on what you can have instead of what you can't have, and changing the dialogue. So, for instance, instead of looking at, bad foods versus good foods, it's more about understanding what these foods are doing in the body. So, for instance, for me, I avoid 90% of the time or more gluten and dairy. And these are because obviously there are different reasons for this. They promote more inflammation in the body. My body just doesn't do well with it, etc. It can worsen PCOS symptoms. So I know all of that. I know how it makes me feel when I eat it. So if I do eat it, I'm like, oh yeah, this doesn't make me feel good. So it's a much better way of looking at how you're eating in terms of how is this making me feel? How is this affecting my body? Instead of just looking at like, this is a no food, this is a good food, and focus on the abundance of foods that you actually can eat. Because if we put too much focus on the negative, then this is going to put us into this, negative mindset, and it's going to be really, really difficult to kind of stick to this, and it's going to make it more of a diet instead of a lifestyle. So I really recommend, changing that dialogue and the way that you're looking at it, becoming more educated on, what these foods are doing in your body, and changing the conversation that you're having with yourself as well, becoming more kinder. So, when we're looking at your mindset as well with PCOS, there's a lot of negativity around it and shame and guilt. So these are things that take time, but really developing more of a dialogue within yourself that is kinder to yourself, and just listening to yourself and just becoming more aware of how you're feeling. So it is the little habits and the little work that you have to do on a daily basis, but specifically getting away from that restriction mode and, the I can't have it, it's a no, all of those kinds of things. Maybe focusing more on, maybe I can have this food, but I don't want to have it. I choose not to have it instead.
Could you maybe give us an example of some healthy, tasty go-to meals that you enjoy and that you find are good for your PCOS?
So I used to be very elaborate in the kitchen and, make all these cool recipes. Now I'm becoming very lazy. I think I have a lazy period right now, but I love making. In the morning, I'll have like a buckwheat bowl with some coconut yogurt, and I'll maybe have a sort of smoothie bowl with some berries or something like that. So I love to have that in the morning. I love to have some eggs. I could make like an omelet with veggies in there, avocado. Usually for lunch, I usually have a bowl of whatever's in the fridge. Again, very convenient, whether it be lentils, chickpeas, beans, tempeh, whatever it is, with lots of leafy greens. I always make sure I get, at least 1 cup to 2 cups of leafy greens at each meal, cruciferous vegetables. I love for dinner 1-pan recipes. So like 1-pan salmon with roasted Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, carrots, whatever it is, sweet potatoes, yam. Those are really easy, and that just puts a lot of stress off of, having to make something super elaborate. I also like making either burrito bowls or even tacos with either, vegetarian sources of protein or animal sources of protein. I have a bunch of recipes as well that I have on my website. Like things, if I'm really craving something more of a comfort food that's more of a healthy version, I'll sometimes make squash, macaroni and cheese with butternut squash, nutritional yeast, that kind of thing. Muffins with, almond flour. What else do I like to make? Pizza with cauliflower crust or either like a gluten-free crust. So I usually just look at meals that are either, a classic sort of staple meal and I alternate and make a healthier swap for them, or I literally just, rely on these macro bowls that I will just put different vegetables and protein sources and fats and make like a really good dressing. So I was really more elaborate before, but now I've become a little bit boring, but that doesn't mean that I'm not satisfied by my meals. I always make sure that they are balanced and that I'm making it yummy with, a good dressing and some toppings and nuts and all of that, and making sure that it is balanced, because if I'm not getting enough protein or I'm not getting enough fat or I'm not getting enough fiber, then I'm definitely going to feel it in the afternoon. I'm not going to feel very, focused or energized. So always make sure that I do balance them.
So how do we do the protein, fiber, fat? Like how much of each should we basically be looking to get?
Yeah, so again, obviously it's going to depend on the person. Usually the size of your palm is what you should be looking for in terms of protein source. I usually recommend 20 to 30 grams of protein per meal. That's usually like the optimal range for you to be able to assimilate the protein. And that's going to keep you, your blood sugar stable, your focus high. Fat, usually going to be between 1 to 3 tablespoons of a healthy fat. So it could be avocado, coconut oil, olive oil, a yummy dressing, whatever it is. And then for vegetables, I always recommend half your plate non-starchy vegetables. So load it up. You really cannot get enough of these non-starchy vegetables. And then for starches like sweet potato, yam, or some grains or legumes, I usually recommend about a quarter of your plate, so about half a cup to a cup. Again, it's going to depend what type of PCOS you have and also how active you are. So some days if I'm, a lot more active, then I'll be upping the carbohydrates and upping the protein. And if I'm not so active, then I'll kind of take that down a notch and maybe have a little bit more fat and not as much starches or things like that.
Stress, I find, is a driving force for a lot of us with PCOS. Can you explain what the HPA axis is and the difference between adrenal fatigue versus HPA axis dysfunction?
Yes, of course. So as we mentioned before, stress plays a big part in PCOS. We're also much more prone to the effects of stress. PCOS women have been shown to have higher levels of cortisol as well. So this is something we really need to focus on. And I think a lot of people just brush this away like, oh yeah, I'm stressed. Like I'll ask people like, how stressed are you? Or are you stressed? And a lot of people think that they're not stressed, but we have to remember that stress is really emotional, physical, and chemical. So even if you're not under a lot of like financial stress, emotional stress, whatever it is, like your relationships are good, you're on vacation, those are, that's always a great place to be at for your stress, like doing things that are fun, whatever. But we also have to remember that there are other stresses as well that are affecting our body that we're not even aware of. So for most of us in the 21st century, we were all under a lot more stress than we are supposed to be. And our body really hasn't kept up with these changes because we are really programmed to be able to deal with acute stressors and then just go back to being relaxed. But now, since we have evolved and we are in the society that is pretty crazy and we're always stimulated and we're always, pressured to do more and more and more. And especially as women, this is going to be playing a big role on hormonal imbalances. It's the body just can't keep up with this kind of stress. So when it comes to the HPA axis, we're looking at the brain adrenal connection. So the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. So looking at the brain, so that's the hypothalamus and the pituitary, those are in the brain. And then the adrenal glands, which are just above the kidneys, which are responding to stressors. So when we're looking at adrenal fatigue, it's not really the right term to use because this is basically initiating and kind of telling us that the adrenals have burnt out or they're just like, they can't function anymore. And that's not true. The adrenals don't just burn out. It's more of what's happening in the brain, and the brain is basically sending signals to the adrenal glands. So When we have continuously high amounts of stress hormones that are produced over and over and over, this HPA axis eventually stops responding properly. And so homeostasis or balance becomes compromised, and the body can't respond the same way to stressors as it could before. This could also be called some sort of cortisol resistance, like insulin resistance, when we're constantly bombarding our system with cortisol and it just stops responding like it should. So this is what we see with insulin resistance, with the cells not responding to insulin. But this starts with the brain. So it's not really the adrenals who are just, like shriveling up and burning out. It's a constant chronic overstimulation that results in a malfunction of this system. And then this results in those physical and emotional symptoms, mental symptoms, where you're feeling like you've been hit by a bus, you can't wake up in the morning, you can't concentrate, you have energy fluctuations, you have insomnia, you're even, not really able to keep up in the gym, you're having a hard time maintaining your weight, or you have a lot of, excess belly fat. All of these things are going to be stemming from HPA axis dysfunction. And we do see this in PCOS women a lot. I see this all the time. I mean, stress affects all of us. And for PCOS women, we're much more affected by it.
So let's say we have HPA axis dysfunction. Are there any natural remedies to help us heal the nervous system?
Totally. So there are many nutrients, many herbal remedies that we can use. But we have to remember that it starts with our lifestyle and our diet, because a lot of people will think, okay, this is a great supplement, this is going to reduce my cortisol. But if you're not addressing where the stress is coming from, then we're not really going to be getting anywhere either. So we have to remember that stressors, again, can come from various different places. And when it comes to the body, we need to address where this is coming from. So, for instance, blood sugar imbalances, those place a huge stress on the adrenal glands. Any infections that could be in the gut or elsewhere, inflammation coming in from, your diet or toxins, lack of sleep, emotional distress, so that's obvious, any trauma, even trauma that's not recent, like trauma can live in the body. So if we're holding on to that, that can also be a stress, and it can be triggered by certain, events in your life. Your mindset as well. So if we're in a positive mindset versus a negative mindset, a lot of people forget that this actually affects your body. So there's actually been science that confirms that, negative feelings can affect the body negatively. And this can also put a lot of stress on the body. And this is why mindset is one of the most important tools that I teach in my practice, because I learned that mindset was a huge part of my healing journey. And it's not just about the nutrition, it's also about what you're thinking, your beliefs, your emotions. Obviously, diet, your exercise, if you're exercising too little or too much, if you're, a shift worker, if you're traveling a lot, if you have jet lag, all of these things can stress out the HPA axis. So the first step is to really to become aware of what is your stressors, because there's usually, more than one, and to start to address that. So this is where we want to look at the root cause approach, what's going on in the body, where's the fire coming from. So that's where I usually start. So it's not really looking at the stress relief remedies. It's more about where is the fire coming from. And then obviously to help with, sleep or those stressful moments, we can take things that can help lower cortisol and help the relaxation response. So I love reishi. So that's a mushroom. Reishi has been shown to help with, relaxation, helping with the parasympathetic response. So putting yourself in more of a relaxed state. And I also love reishi for PCOS because it also helps to reduce androgens. So reishi can be really, really great. I love L-theanine, so it's an amino acid found in green tea that helps to relax the mind. So that can be really helpful if you're, under a lot of stress during the day, or if you have a big presentation or whatever it is, or you can even take it before bedtime. That can kind of help you fall asleep quicker. And then adaptogens, which are really amazing. They help the body adapt and become more resilient to stress. So that can help while you're addressing where the stress is coming from. Those can look like rhodiola, ashwagandha, holy basil. They're all a little bit different, so you want to look into which one is best for you. And then magnesium is something I recommend across the board. Doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you're PCOS or not. Magnesium is going to be commonly deficient. It's been shown to be more deficient in PCOS women. than non-PCOS women as well, and it's going to be excreted excessively in times of stress. And magnesium is this calming mineral, so that can help you with sleep and with anxiety too. So those are some things that you can add onto your protocol, as well as obviously addressing where the stress is coming from, and then, adopting things like meditation before bed or during the day when you're feeling stressed. Deep breathing is something highly underrated. It's something you can do anytime you're feeling anxiety. Before eating, I usually recommend doing it too, to help with your body getting into the digestive state. Anything that just puts you in a relaxed state, that is fun, that is playful, because I think a lot of us have gotten away from this notion of that we have to hustle all the time, we have to work all the time, we have no time for ourselves, especially women, PCOS women. We're just not really taking care of ourselves anymore. We're putting the priority on everyone else. So I give homework to a lot of my clients, like, go have fun. Like, it's pretty crazy that we have to think about this now, but getting outside in nature, doing whatever is fun for you is really going to help that as well. So trying to make sure that your lifestyle is also supporting your health.
That's such a good point. For me, I made this year like the year where I'm going to be more creative and have time to do art and to like draw and garden, do things like that to relax more. And definitely huge change in my PCOS symptoms. Like my skin is clearer. I wake up and I'm like thin the whole day. I have been eating like more lenient with my food, and it's like nothing sticks anymore. I don't have that swelling, and I think it's just because I have like this relaxing practice that I've added that I really look forward to now.
Yeah, 100%. And I see this with so many women, they're relying on the coffee, the wine to kind of wind down after a hard day, etc. But we're really not tapping into our creativity and our fun side, our playful side. And a lot of us are relying on these stimulants or these external factors to kind of help us come down, or, looking to food, etc. So this is a great way to kind of tap into the things that you actually want to do and that are going to make you feel so much better. And as you mentioned, it makes such a huge difference. So really want to hit home that it might sound like these are like stupid little habits that don't really play a big part, but they're probably going to play a bigger role in your PCOS journey and your healing journey than like that supplement that you want to take.
100%. I mean, no supplement has made me feel this good. It
No.
just hasn't happened. And I want
I
to
agree.
ask you about coffee. What are your thoughts on coffee? Because I find, for me at least, it makes me more stressed, my symptoms worse, and I get really jittery and anxious.
Yeah, I feel 100% the same way. It's funny because I haven't had coffee in like 4 years, and people will literally be like, what? That's so shocking. But I used to be addicted to it. And, you get up, you got to have your coffee. There's all those memes that are like, got to have my coffee, otherwise I can't function, or whatever it is. Like, don't talk to me before I have my coffee. But the reality is, it's kind of sad because a lot of us are like that. So I think that if somebody tells you to skip the coffee and you have an immediate reaction that is like, no way, then you probably do need to have a coffee break, because it's not something that you should rely on for energy, for stimulation, for mood, and all of that. It's kind of like a crutch. And in terms of PCOS, I usually see cutting it out, or at least minimizing it, make a huge difference, honestly, in women's hormones, women's imbalances, PCOS symptoms. Because as you mentioned, it does definitely increase cases of anxiety, even depression, because it's a stimulator. So it's going to stimulate the nervous system. And if we're in this HPA axis dysfunction, or, we're under a lot of stress, we really don't want to stimulate even more, because you're basically just, I'm not going to use the word burnout, because then we're going back to the adrenal fatigue myth, but you're definitely not helping it recuperate and heal. So we really want to focus on getting away from relying on stimulants, because this can just make the whole endocrine system go out of whack and, really affect the hormones. And then a lot of people really have a hard time processing it, because they may lack the enzymes to actually process it in the liver. And then we also have to remember that this is extra stuff that the liver has to process too. Same thing goes for alcohol. And it's already going to be overburdened. So I usually recommend people, avoid or eliminate and go for things like, if you have to have caffeine, green tea. Four Sigmatic even has some great coffee blends, or mushroom blends that are going to help with that stress response and bring down the cortisol levels. And then even, herbal teas are going to be awesome for PCOS, and focusing more on increasing your energy naturally, because I think a lot of people think that, well, how do I make energy if I don't get stimulants or caffeine? But it's totally possible. Your body actually does make energy on its own. You don't need it coming from outside sources. But this is where you want to focus on the nutrition. Like a green smoothie in the morning can be really helpful to get you that energy boost and feeling good, because you're getting all of these greens and all of these nutrients that are needed for the body to actually make this energy by itself.
So, what are thoughts on alcohol consumption when you have PCOS?
Yeah, so alcohol, as I mentioned before, it's going to put a lot of stress on the liver. The liver has to detoxify alcohol, and it puts a priority on it. So it has over like 500 functions for the liver. So if you're getting alcohol coming into the system, it's going to put those other functions on hold, because alcohol is a priority. So first of all, we're not giving the liver any help. And this is going to create a lot of, hormonal imbalances, because the liver is going to be involved in so many other processes, not only detoxification, but blood sugar balance, etc. So obviously on the liver, it does take a big hit. It also increases estrogen quite significantly. So with PCOS, we can see a sort of excess estrogen state, because a lot of us are not ovulating. So we're not making progesterone. So we're going to see this imbalance of the ratio of estrogen to progesterone. Alcohol can definitely increase that as well. So that can worsen symptoms like PCOS that are with PCOS, or PMS symptoms. And it's also going to be blood sugar. It's going to be spiking your blood sugar and creating a lot of imbalances with your blood sugar. So all in all, it's not really doing you any favors. Obviously, the type of alcohol can also differ as well. So for instance, like the beer and the cocktails are going to be the worst ones. If you do go out, I usually recommend going for wine, or, the vodka or gin, going for something that is like a gin and tonic kind of thing without the excess sugar, and making sure that you're having it with a protein or a fat source to make sure that you help to stabilize that blood sugar. But I do recommend women avoid it as much as possible, just because it's not doing us any favors. Like there's no benefits really to it.
Yeah, I personally have never had alcohol. I've just had a sip here and there, and I would immediately get a migraine. So I always knew this is probably not something I should have.
Yeah, and I mean, none of us really feel amazing after. Like, you might feel good when you have it. You're like, oh, I feel confident and like whatever it is. But then pretty quickly, you don't feel good. So that's a good feedback as well. Like, how are you feeling?
What are your thoughts on CBD for, like, let's say PCOS symptoms like maybe PMS anxiety or menstrual cramps or migraines?
Yeah, I think it's great. I haven't used it that extensively for myself. I've used it a few times in terms of stress relief, and it did help me. I've heard great stories of women using it for all of the things you mentioned, PMS symptoms, anxiety, stress. It can be really, really awesome for that. And I think it's a great alternative to things like non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, things like that, that can actually, really create a lot of havoc with your gut. So I don't recommend using those on a regular basis for like things like PMS. So looking for alternatives, things like ginger or CBD. Yeah, and there have been studies that have been shown that it can be very helpful for these kinds of conditions and symptoms. I haven't dove that much into it, but I definitely think it's a great alternative.
When you first get your period, I've noticed that there are certain foods that I cannot have, especially if I have anything cold, like if I had like a green smoothie, a cold one, or anything like that that's very cold food. I will immediately get nauseous and my symptoms will get way worse. Have you noticed that foods need to change during different parts of a woman's cycle?
In terms of the cycle, I don't really hear this that often, but I definitely recommend looking at more warming foods in terms of like the seasons as well. And then not forcing yourself to have like a smoothie or like a smoothie bowl if it's like the middle of winter or whatever, or if you're actually not feeling that great. I don't do that great with cold foods during this time either. Like if I have a smoothie, I don't really feel that amazing. And my digestion is like really off. It's also something I look into in terms of my Ayurvedic type. So I'm more of a vata, so I need more warming, grounding foods. So really tuning into your body and, seeing how you feel. During the cycle, your needs are also going to change as well. You're usually going to be craving more of those comforting, warming foods during the second half of your cycle in the luteal phase. I mean, it makes sense when you are going through your menstrual cycle. You're supposed to be, slowing down, tuning in more, having more of this comfort, I guess. And you do feel like you do need more of that. So a lot of women will feel like they're more fatigued, or they're not really into like the high intensity workouts. They just want to have like a cup of soup or like the comfort foods and things like that. Cravings can go up as well due to the drop of hormones. So just respecting that and paying attention to your body, I think, is really important. And usually in the second half of your cycle, it does make sense. You're going to be going for more of the cooked foods instead of like the raw foods. So I usually recommend going for the salads and like the higher carbs and all of those kinds of foods in the first half when you're more insulin sensitive as well, and then going for more of the grounding, anti-inflammatory, warming foods in the second half.
So you mentioned before a victim mindset. So with PCOS and hormonal imbalances in general, it can feel like you just were dealt a bad hand in life and you could get like a victim mindset. So how can this mindset affect our healing?
Oh my goodness, it affects everything. And I see this all the time. I dealt with this myself. It was, the victim mindset. Boo-hoo, poor me. Why was I dealt this? Why is this happening to me? This is not fair, blah, blah, blah. And that definitely did not help anything. It just made the cycle even worse. And honestly, obviously, lifestyle and diet changes have been profound for my PCOS, but I saw a tremendous shift that was pretty incredible when I started to actually address my mind. And that's where I had this huge epiphany of it's not all about the food at all, because you can be eating completely clean. I see people like this say this to me all the time, like, I'm eating clean, but I'm still not seeing results. I don't understand, blah, blah. Obviously, there's many factors that come to play, but if you are using this victim mindset and this negative mindset on a daily basis, it's definitely going to be affecting the body. Dr. Joe Dispenza, he talks a lot about this, how your thoughts actually affect your body in, a biological sense. So it's really cool. He talks about the science. If you want to dig into that more, highly recommend checking him out. But at the end of the day, we have to realize that it's not your fault that you have PCOS, but it's your responsibility to do something about it and to take action, because no one is coming to save you. This is the hard truth, and no one's going to do the work for you. So you really have to show up for yourself, and that is a form of self-respect. It can be really hard to move from this place of, self-loathing and this victim mindset and all of that, and go towards a place of like self-love and all of that and self-respect. But it's really starting to become more aware of your thoughts and how you're treating your body and how you're thinking of yourself. And awareness is really the first step, because a lot of us are just not even aware of the thoughts we're thinking on a daily basis, and even all of this stuff that is just suffocating us and that we're just accumulating over the years. We've taken up emotions, our thoughts, our beliefs from other people. People have told us, you can't do this, you're not good enough, like blah, blah, blah. Even if it's not directly told to you, you might have just, ingrained this into your brain and took this as a message. It could have come as a child or, from doctors, etc. And it's just all this external stuff that is not yours. So it's just becoming more aware of all of these voices that are not actually yours, and just becoming more in tune with your real self. So how I really started to change for me, because it can really sound really daunting for this whole journey, especially if you're in a dark place, it's to start to become aware on a daily basis and to start to shift those thoughts. So becoming aware of, what's coming up and then having a conversation with it, I find super empowering, because a lot of the time, if you are in a state of, mid binge, or you're going to, self-sabotage or whatever, it's coming from, again, the animal part of your brain, which is only trying to keep you safe, but not in a good way. So having a conversation, I find, is really interesting, because that can kind of help you shift and understand, oh, actually, this voice is not helping me, and I can let it go. Like, you don't actually need to hold on to it. So having conversations with yourself, I think, is really cool. And that people might think that's really weird, but you can literally just talk to yourself internally and start to shift that conversation.
What are some specific ways that people can work with you online?
So I have my one-on-one program, which is my PCOS Breakthrough Academy. That's my most complete program where we dive through all of this stuff I mentioned. We go through the lifestyle, the nutrition, the supplements, the mindset work. And that's really my most in-depth, complete program. So that you can apply for. And I only take a few women per month just because there is a lot of one-on-one work. So that's my intensive program. Otherwise, if you want to connect, I'm on Instagram all the time. So I usually recommend come hang out there. And I share a lot of stuff. I do videos, trainings, share a lot of research and all that kind of stuff on there.
Where can everyone find you online other than Instagram? Like, what's your account and website?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, Instagram is where I hang out the most. So you can check my name, Laurence Annez, on Instagram. Otherwise, I have my website as well with all of my programs on there. My blog, I'm putting a lot of stuff on my blog a lot with lots of PCOS articles. And I also have a podcast. If you guys want to check it out as well, it's called the Addicted to Healthy podcast.
Awesome. So thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thank you for having me.
Have you ever thought about starting your own podcast? When I was trying to get this podcast off the ground, I had a lot of questions. How do I record an episode? How do I get my show into all the apps that people like to listen with? How do I make money from my podcast? The answer to all of these questions is really simple. Anchor. Anchor is a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing your podcast. Best of all, it's 100% free and ridiculously easy to use. And now Anchor can match you with great sponsors who want to advertise on your podcast. That means you can get paid to podcast right away. In fact, that's what I'm doing right now by reading this ad. Anchor's learning curve is virtually none. All you need to do is press a button, start talking, and then distribute to everybody. So if you've always wanted to start your own podcast and make money doing it, go to anchor.fm/start. to join me and a diverse community of podcasters already using Anchor. That's anchor.fm/start. I can't wait to hear your podcast, so send it to me. Thank you for listening to the episode. If you made it this far, I'm sure you found some benefit to the hard work that I put into the show. Show your support by subscribing to the podcast. Leave me a voicemail question or email me at thehealthfulgypsy@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. Be sure to join the Facebook group. You can find all that information in the show notes and my website, khatibi.com. This podcast is for informational, merrymaking, and metaphysical purposes only. Statements and views are not medical advice. This podcast, including Khatibi, disclaim any adverse effects by the use of information you may have heard. Opinions of guests are totally their own. This podcast does not endorse statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications, credibilities, or sanity. Individuals may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to on the podcast. If you think you have a medical problem, consult with a licensed medical physician, not just the spirit of your ancestors while on ayahuasca.